The chandelier trembled first, a shiver of light rippling through cut crystal, as if the room itself had flinched. Reflections scattered over the polished stone and danced across Sarah's cheek, a heartbeat before the heat landed there. The slap cracked the lobby's hush, a hard, flat sound that climbed the height of glass and steel and kept echoing under the silver crown of light. She did not cry out. Habit caught her breath and folded it small. Her hand rose halfway to the reddening skin. A cautious bird, uncertain where to land. Across from her, Richard stood within his own weather of cologne and money, the kind of air that expected the world to give way. 3 men in flawless suits drifted behind him, their laughter drying on their lips, whiskey sweet and shallow. "Pick it up," he said, and the words did not need volume to breathe. "Or pick up your last paycheck." On the wet floor a few steps away, the mop lay at a slant, the bucket rocking on its wheels. Bleach clouded the water a pale gray. The wheel clicked when Richard's shoe skated through the puddle, a tiny sound that still pretended this was ordinary. Sarah reached for the handle. It slipped once in her raw, soap-burned hands, then settled. She pressed the head to the stone and drew a narrow, apologetic arc. The cloth squealed. The sound might have been sorry. From the corridor, soft, bare feet pattered like timid applause. Emily, blue dress, rumpled by work and night, came near enough to look but not to startle. "I want to help," she whispered, back to the chair. "Baby," Sarah said without looking, gentle voice. No air for fear. Richard's eyes flicked toward the child and away again. "This is a workplace, not a daycare," he said, as if the architecture itself agreed with him. "She is quiet?" Sarah answered. "We will be done soon. You will be done when I say you are done," he said. He made the sentence sound like a signature. Sarah drew the mop along the seam where 2 slabs of granite met. Dirt loved edges. She had learned the ways of stubborn things long ago, learned what bent and what never did. Above her, a crystal clock ticked high on the wall, every second like a glass bead falling into a jar. Time mattered here. Time had cards to play. Time could testify, could convict, could betray. Emily's voice arrived like a bell rung under a blanket. "Your face, Mom?" "It is fine," Sarah said, and the skin burned as if the word itself were a match. She kept moving. Mop, breath, patience. The building glittered in the dim like a jewel with a pulse, and the pulse belonged to other people. "You embarrassed me earlier," Richard said, and the way he said me made the space between the letters sound larger than the room. "You said the East Wing was not ready. In front of my partners, I was finishing it," Sarah said, and it was true. But truth here required witnesses and a camera and a stamped sheet, and none of those things worked for her name. He did not take her word. He took the mop instead, closing his hand around the handle just above hers. He pulled with the casual confidence of someone who had never been told no when a yes would be more comfortable. The handle wrapped her knuckles, and the old pain flared, tender and ordinary, as humiliating as it was small. "Watch your hands," he murmured, and made helpful sound like threat. Sarah stepped back into the marble corner, where warm stone turned cool, then colder. A little dizzy wave swam through her chest and was gone. She had scrubbed until midnight and slept too shallow and got back up anyway. Tired was a room she knew by heart. "Please do not raise your voice in front of my daughter," she said, the ribbon of her voice held still in the air. "Do your job," he said. Then his palm pressed her shoulder and pushed, not enough to throw her, just enough to prove the point. The counter bit into the soft of her upper arm. The pain felt clean and cold, like ice put to a burn. Emily gasped. It was a thin, tearing sound. Sarah's body moved without asking her. She turned, sheltering the child with the angle of her frame. "Enough," she told him. Please. He wanted the last line. He always did. Look at me when I speak, he said. She kept her eyes on his tie knot. It was perfect. It would remain perfect, because someone else would fix it when it slipped. That was the kind of detail the building loved. Mom, Emily said, he is… Shh. Sarah breathed. It is all right. It was not all right. It was the kind of not all right you get through by choosing which harm is smaller. She kept her spine in its place and felt the clock strike a soft, bright second inside her teeth. Do you know what investors see when they walk into my lobby? Richard asked. They see me. Then be careful what you show them, Sarah said, and the sentence left her mouth before the careful part of her could stop it. Silence stood up between them. It smelled like glass cleaned too well. His hand lifted, not a fist, never that. The open palm of a man who has paperwork for the aftermath. Sarah did not move. She was not defiance and not surrender. She was a woman deciding what to protect. Emily moved first. Small hands pressed against the fabric of his pant leg, a child's weight of warning. Do not hurt my mom, she said, and the tremble in her voice carried a stronger thing beneath it. He froze out of offense, not fear, struck by the rudeness of unwanted contact. His gaze dropped to the little hands, then rose like a blade sliding back into place. He had not planned this. Sarah pulled Emily back by the shoulders, careful not to squeeze her too hard. The little bones like wings. Go to the door, she said softly. Now, wait on the steps. No, Emily said, but her eyes nodded anyway, because they had practiced leaving rooms like this without breaking. She took 2 tiny steps, and then 3, and then she ran. Her feet made a bright slap on stone, the sound that had been joy in other places. Tonight it sounded like a small bell struck again and again down a long hallway. The door sighed open and exhaled city air. The blue dress flared like a flag, and then she was gone. A streak of child into the pool of night. Where does she think she is going? One of the suited men said, then folded his voice away as if it were dangerous too. Bring her back, Richard said, but his men did not move. Orders need bodies to become real, and none of the bodies wanted this particular task. Their shoes made small squeaks as they shifted weight. Pride, like polish, could be slippery. Sarah lifted the mop as if it might help her stand. Her hands shook once. She steadied them the way she would smooth a bed. Palms down, breath in. She set the cloth against the floor and drew one slow, shining line that felt like drawing a boundary she could keep. Outside, something changed in the sound of the street. Not a car, not the soft rush of late buses. A deeper vibration found the glass and hummed through the stone underfoot, the low-layered thrum of engines, idling together, idle, then a notch up, then a second and a third pitch settling into a chord. The chandelier answered with the softest ring of crystal on crystal. Sarah knew that sound. She had heard it under morning sun near the bakery, in parades with no banner, at twilight, when men with wind on their jackets returned to places that smelled like food and light. Motorcycles, more than one. The chord swelled and held like a long-held breath. Noise, Richard muttered, as if the word could instruct the fact. Are you expecting someone else? One of his partners asked, trying on a smile that did not fit. No answer. Richard smoothed his tie. The watch caught the chandelier and threw a shard of white across the floor like a moving blade. He stood taller, the posture of a man who believes the camera is always on him and belongs to him. Sarah's eyes found the clock again. Another second leaped and disappeared. A quiet certainty settled through her chest. Not hope exactly, not strategy, something closer to recognition. Patterns, movement, the pitch of engines that did not hurry but arrived. The difference between rushing and coming was a kind of truth the body could feel. Wind pushed under the door and brought the clean scent of cold air and road dust and gasoline that had not yet turned bitter. Sarah placed the mop into the bucket. Water sihil. She wiped her palms along the neat front of her uniform and felt the sting of bleach in a fresh crack of skin. She lifted her chin just enough to make breathing easier and said, "We are done." "You are done when," Richard began, and the doors at the far end of the lobby swung wide on that word. Air shouldered in. Headlights swept pale bars along the granite, up the pillars, across the ceiling, and settled into a bright stillness that turned the crystals steady and hard. Engines idled beyond the glass, patient and heavy, a baseline that calmed even as it warned. Outside, buckle clinked, soles scuffed concrete, and someone shifted weight the way men do when they decide to stand their ground without raising their voice. The room stopped pretending to be empty. It felt like the moment before a curtain opens, not because a show would begin, but because the truth had finally reached the door. Sarah set her palm on the counter to feel something that would not change its mind. Stone pressed back, cool and sure. She breathed out. The air tasted clean now. The mop handle leaned where it had been dropped earlier, ringed by a thin, dark halo on the tile that marked a circle she did not need to step into again. Her cheek throbbed in a slow clock of its own. She thought of the blue flare of Emily's dress, the quick slap of small bare heels, the way a child's cry can travel farther than a door, farther than pride, farther than the limits men set for what they will listen to. "Do not let them in here," Richard said to the room, to the glass, to whoever would care to obey. No one answered him. Outside, one engine tapped its idle like knuckles on a door. Another answered. A third came in underneath, a low instrument. Finding the note the others needed, the chandelier did not tremble now. It glittered with the steadiness of something that has chosen a side. Sarah slid half a step to find the angle where the doors and the clock shared her gaze. Time, arrival, witness, all in one frame. She felt her shoulders lower, barely, the way a guard lowers a shield to see the horizon better, not to surrender it. The engines held their chord. Then, as if the night itself had cleared its throat, they climbed one breath louder. The quiet street woke, and with it, a promise that did not require anyone's permission. The engines outside held their low chord, and the sound settled through the stone like a slow tide. The chandelier steadied its glitter, and the lobby pretended to be calm again. Sarah kept one palm on the counter to remind her body where the ground lived. The marble was cool and indifferent, and that indifference was a strange comfort, because it did not lie, and it did not flatter. Her cheek throbbed in a steady pulse that she could live with. Steady was a language her body understood. Richard watched the doors with a cut of the eyes and then watched her again, as if he could order the light to stop cooperating with anything that was not himself. He smoothed his tie and took one precise step until the polished toe of his shoe kissed the dark ring of mop water on the floor. He did not like the ring. He did not like anything that suggested history or proof or labor. "You are not done," he said in a voice that tried to sound quiet and kind, and only sounded practiced. Sarah did not answer. She set the mop upright in the wringer and turned the bucket handle so it would stop its loose rattle. Silence collected in the high air under the chandelier, and it felt clean for the first time all night. She let a breath in and let it out, and the breath went where it needed to go. From the corridor there was no longer the soft patter of small bare feet. There was the thinner echo of absence. Emily had crossed the threshold into the city air, and Sarah pictured the small jaw set the way children set their jaws when they decide to be brave. She pictured the blue dress and the quick bright heels, and she used the picture like a handhold on a ladder. Richard's partners pretended to be busy with their glasses, but their eyes had the restless shine of men who wanted the next act to arrive so they could decide what it meant to them. One cleared his throat as if to offer a way out. "Maybe we step outside for a minute," he said with a careful smile. "Let the air do its work." Richard did not share. He kept his gaze on Sarah, as if she were a screen stuck on the wrong image, and he needed it to change by will alone. "You will finish the west corridor now," he said. "Windows, ledges, rails, every fingerprint gone. If I can see where you have been, then you have failed." He made the words sound like a certificate he would sign over her life. Sarah measured the weight that sentence placed on her back and decided she could carry it a little longer. "Yes," she said in a tone that refused to bend and refused to break. She took the spray bottle from the cart and checked the nozzle. A fine lemon mist bloomed along the brass rail. The smell cut through bleach and tiredness, and she folded a clean cloth over her palm and pulled one straight stroke from support, to support the way she had been taught when work was still new to her hands. Richard followed at a distance that felt like weather. "Higher," he said. "Lower," he said. "You missed a spot there." "No, the other there." She was not missing anything, and the brass told the truth with its shine. The cloth darkened, and the thin muscle along her wrist began its familiar ache. She switched hands without a word, and kept moving, because movement was a promise she could keep to herself. "Do you understand what tonight means?" he said. "Yes," she said, and she left the answer as small and whole as a seed. "Investors," he said. "Capital," he said. "The tower is a statement, and it says something about me." Sarah thought of words that mattered more: rent, and food, and school, and sleep. She let her knees take a share of the work, and kept the cloth true, and even because evenness was a kind of prayer. The crystal clock ticked high on the wall, and the sound landed inside her like a pin on a map. Markers matter, she thought. Time will tell the truth if someone asks the right way. Someone has already called 911, and units are on their way, and he does not know. The sentence existed in the air like a thread hidden under paint, present and unseen. It tugged the room toward what must come. She reached the end of the rail and pivoted the cart. A handspan and the wheels rolled with a soft, patient hush. She adjusted the trash bag tie so it would not cut her fingers later, because later always arrives with a bill, and she preferred to pay early when she could. She wiped the nozzle so the cleaner would not crust and betray tomorrow with clumps and streaks. These small fidelities kept a person intact when bigger things tried to take the shape of a person away. Richard waited for apology and did not get it. He waited for defiance and did not get that either. Steadiness was the mirror he hated most. "Your daughter should not be here," he said, as if he had invented the rule and therefore owned its mercy. "She has nowhere else," Sarah said. She kept to the short road between truth and tone, and she did not mention the cost of care and the distance to care and the paperwork that eats hours and souls. "Not my problem," he said again, and the sentence had lost paint and showed its cheap wood underneath. Outside, the engines shifted their breath and notched down, and then up, and the vibration found the rail under her hand. It hummed like a gentler electricity, and the metal warmed under her palm. In the long window, Sarah watched the lobby in reflection. The chandelier held steady, and the clock moved its hand across a black tick that looked like a thin mouth that would not speak for anyone. She saw herself in uniform hair, tied back, clean cloth in hand, doing a job that refused to let go. She watched that woman work and felt a door crack open in her chest, a door that had been painted shut for years. The outer doors drew a deeper breath of night, and the smell of clean, cold air slipped into the lobby. There were voices outside, shaped around a question, not loud and not afraid, just present. One of the partners drifted nearer the entrance as if pulled by a rope tied to curiosity. He lifted his glass and did not sip because the hand that held it had remembered there were other things. A hand was for. Finish, Richard said, because command was the only tool he trusted. She finished because rails should be finished, and because her hands had their own honor. She folded the cloth and slipped it into laundry and capped the bottle, and set the cart snug against the column with the breakdown, because order is a way of keeping your name in your pocket. She looked up at the chandelier, and it glittered like a witness with a clear memory. He moved to block her view of the doors, as if his body could be a wall. "Do you think you can walk away?" he said. "I think I can stand where I am," she said. He leaned in with the need to fill the air. "Do you know who I am?" he said. "I know what you are doing," she said, and the words surprised them both with their simple weight. He blinked and something mean and old lifted in his face, and then sat down again. The engines outside did not argue and did not explain and did not ask permission. They held the low line of patience. They waited the way a tide waits. He reached for the mop again as if taking the tool would take the dignity. He closed his hand on empty air, and for a breath his face was almost human in its confusion. Then he remembered his sneer and put it on like a mask. The smallest partner coughed and offered a practical olive branch. "Give her 2 minutes," he said. "It will only help us." "We are not doing this for her," Richard said, and a flush climbed his neck as if the sentence had peeled back a layer of himself. Sarah felt heat that was not shame rise in her chest, not pride, something clenched and necessary like a hand closing on a rail when the stairs go dark. She did not move. She watched the tall glass and the shapes beyond it ripen from shadow to bodies. She watched, without asking for salvation, because survival is not a posture and not a plea. It is a practice. A faint smear showed on the lower rail where a small hand had brushed earlier, only to feel the cold smooth. Sarah bent and removed it with one careful pass, because there are traces you do not leave behind, even when your heart wants to leave everything. She straightened, and the air had changed again. It carried the scent of leather and wind, and a promise that was not a word. "You will not bring strangers into my lobby," Richard said to the room and to the glass and to power as a concept. "We are not yours," Sarah said, and did not know she would say it until the even sound stood between them. Her cheek beat its small drum and then quieted, and she pictured Emily on the steps, with hands pressed together the way children pray when they are not sure who is supposed to listen. She pictured the bright set of the little spine and understood that a map had been redrawn in both their bodies. The engines held one last breath, and then drifted a note lower, as if a hand had rested on a shoulder and said, "Now." A boot scuffed somewhere beyond the door, and a steady voice answered a question none of them could hear. Inside, the clock ticked again, and the sound felt like a signature written in the air. Time had decided to be on record tonight. Sarah placed both hands flat on the counter and stood her ground. She could feel the place where the marble grew colder near the edge, and the place where heat from her skin had left a thin reminder that she existed. "Finish the lobby," Richard said again, because he had run out of other ways to pretend the moment belonged to him. "We will finish," she said, and let the first word hang a breath longer than necessary. And he heard it and did not know where to put it. Beyond the glass, a figure entered the rectangle of light and paused with a steadiness that announced itself better than noise. Other shapes took their places like geometry rather than biography. The chandelier caught the line of a shoulder, and the curve of a helmet, and the quiet blaze of a small metal badge sewn into leather. The city air brought the clean taste of gasoline that had not been tamed into polish. It tasted like road and decision, and something that refused to be decorative. Sarah did not smile, and she did not crumble, and she did not pray for a miracle. She marked the map again. The doors, the clock, the counter, her feet. She counted belonging in the simple inventory of what she could hold and what she could set down. She felt the night move from waiting into witness, and she stood in the middle of it and remained herself. The doors opened as if the night itself had placed steady hands upon them and insisted upon entry. Cool air crossed the threshold with the faint dust of the road, and with it came the clean dark scent of leather warmed by wind. Light from the street pooled on the granite and climbed the pillars in calm bands. Outside, engines settled into patient hush. Not silence, never silence, but a held note that made the glitter of the building feel less like power and more like costume. Sarah did not move. Both palms stayed on the counter as if she could hold the room to its better self. The marble carried a seam beneath one hand, and a memory of warmth beneath the other, where her skin had rested a moment longer. Her cheek pulsed with a measured rhythm that belonged to blood and not to fear. She could live with blood. It stayed loyal. Shapes filled the doorway. Helmets lifted, shoulders squared, vests hung heavy, patches catching the chandelier and throwing back small sparks that were not show but fact. The man at the front removed his helmet with a motion so simple it felt like a completed sentence. Close-cropped hair, a jaw shadowed by road. He did not hurry. He entered the way a decision enters a room when it is done asking permission. Two others stood just inside the threshold and held their places, not crowding, not posturing, a geometry of presence that steadied the air, the way a hand steadies a ladder. The lobby's old ventilation hum met the low line of the engines and agreed with it. And for the first time all night, the building sounded honest. Richard stepped forward as if the lobby lived in his suit. "This is private property," he said, but the sentence fell flat on stone that had stopped obeying him. The front man looked once at Richard and then to Sarah, as if the room itself had pointed him toward the only witness it trusted. "You the one who needs help?" he asked. His voice carried gravel and calm. No hurry lived in it. Sarah tested her breath and found it sound. "Yes," she said. "My daughter ran to you." He nodded once, a small seal on a promise already kept. "She is outside," he said. "She told us enough." Richard laughed without joy. "You have made a mistake," he said. "My staff is acting out. Leave now before you embarrass yourselves." No one moved. One suited man shifted, and his shoes confessed themselves with a small squeak. The old reflex to make herself small drifted through Sarah like a draft, and did not stay the bearer. She lifted her chin the smallest distance. It was not defiance. It was the posture the body requires when it chooses to breathe. The front man let his gaze travel. He marked the edge of red on Sarah's cheek. He read the mop ring on the floor that had not yet faded. He returned to her face with an attention that asked nothing and promised only to listen. "You all right?" he asked. "I will be," she said. "Thank you for coming." "Nobody ignores a cry like that," he said, and the words arrived with no embroidery. Finding the ground and standing there, he took a step that placed his shoulder between Sarah and the place where harm liked to stand, and the air behind him became shelter. Richard set his jaw. "You are trespassing," he said, layering the word with old ownership. "If you do not leave, I will call the police." "Call them," the man said. "We can wait." Outside, an engine adjusted, a friendly aside between machines. The door breathed again and stroked the crystal, so the light changed color, the way water shades from steel to silver in cloud. Sarah's hands left the counter because her body had decided they could One hand rose to the collar of the leather draped across her shoulders and pinched the edge to test its truth. It smelled of road and wind and a cleaner sweat than money makes. Her other hand closed around the folded cloth on the cart, not to work, only to hold something loyal. Richard took another step because steps were what he had left. "Do you know who I am?" he asked the room, and when the room did not answer, he addressed the man. "This is my building, my event. You are done here." "Not with her," the man said. He did not add a title. He did not reach for heat. He simply gave the room a different center. One of the partners tried a lighter tactic. "We do not want trouble," he said, the smile on his face looking like a sketch that had not been inked. "We have guests. This is all a misunderstanding. Then there is nothing to fear." The man said, "She can speak." Sarah felt the floor under her, through the soles of her shoes, as if the stone had remembered her name. The clock ticked its thin, bright tick that believed in minutes and in witnesses. She wanted to sit. She wanted to gather her child. She wanted the rail to dry without streaking. Once perched along her ribs like birds on a wire, she chose two and kept them. Stand. Breathe. Richard chose something colder. He smiled, and it did not reach the eye. "She is emotional," he said to the man, as if rain could be scolded. "She is confused about boundaries. She brought a child into a workplace at night. She has created a scene." The word scene tried to step into Sarah's mouth and speak for her. She did not let it. She met the steady gaze of the man and found a level place there. "He hurt me in front of her," she said. "That is the truth." The man took that and did not flinch. He nodded once. In the nod, Sarah felt a line drawn from the steps outside where small feet had slapped the stone to this patch of floor where she was choosing not to fold. Richard sensed the room drift away and surged toward it like tide with something to prove. He reached for the mop handle, a gesture that wanted to look like control and only looked like the taking of what was not offered. The man closed a hand around his wrist in the small space between reaching and possession. The grip was firm and clean and did not speak. It simply held. "Do not," the man said. The word chalked a line on the floor. Richard stiffened. "Release me," he said, and when nothing changed, he felt the thin first wire of panic hum under his skin. He looked beyond the hand that held him to the men who had arrived to drink his wine and applaud his stories, and discovered they had all at once grown interested in light, in glass, in shoes. Sarah saw his profile near enough to study it without shrinking. The tight color near the mouth, the jump at the temple. She had never watched him this close without making herself small. She did not make herself small. She watched the way the man held the wrist, with respect for the hinge, with restraint that refused to be performance. It was not punishment. It was refusal. A voice came from outside, the kind you hear between machines, the kind that carries without trying, because it is not lying. The engines answered by keeping their line. The two shapes at the door took a careful step across the wet edge and stopped in a way that said, "Here is enough for now." Richard twisted. The grip did not change. The man looked once at the fingers and then returned his gaze to Sarah. "You want to sit?" he asked, offering water to a throat that did not beg. "No," she said, hearing steady where she had feared a tremor. "I want to stand." "Then we stand," he said. Richard found language again because silence had made it itch. "I will sue," he said, as if paper could strike. "You and your gang. You and your charity case. I will ruin you. Money always tries ruin first." The man let his wrist go, and the fact that he let it go made more difference than any grip could. Richard pulled his arm back like it had freed itself, tugged a cuff, searched his skin for a mark, and found only himself. Sarah felt the building widen around her, as though the walls had drawn back a few breaths to make space for truth. She saw the men as they were in this minute, and understood that whatever came next would not erase what breath and eyes had already set down. "You should leave," Richard said to the man, throwing the order like a rope he expected to land. "You do not belong." "She belongs," the man said. "We belong until she does not need us." The jacket sat heavy upon her like an honest sentence. It creaked when she moved. That soft whisper of hide. The sound rang inside this building like a bell. A church had forgotten it owned. From the corridor, an elevator side opened somewhere. From the street, a kickstand found concrete with a humble scrape. From the wall, the clock signed another second with thin, bright ink. Richard touched the tie at his throat and snapped it back into place. A man resetting a mask. "You," he said to Sarah, lowering his voice, as if secrecy could sweeten cruelty, "will return that jacket and return to work. You will not speak to my guests. You will not make yourself important." Sarah looked at her hands for counsel. One still held a folded clean cloth. She set it on the cart and touched the seam near her collarbone, where the jacket had been joined from separate pieces. A seam is honest. It says, "I was more than one, and now I am one. I will finish what is mine to finish," she said, "and I will not return to harm." The man nodded, that same small, faithful nod that honored all the thresholds where no one had stood before, and promised better from now on. The partners discovered a safer courage in calendars and screens. One murmured about a call he was missing. Another decided the night had fresh air worth sampling. Their eyes sought exits that would not demand spine. A small blur of blue appeared in the doorway and Sarah's heart lifted like a string pulled by a kind hand. Emily stood just inside the line where outside becomes inside. She clutched the frame with both hands like a sailor gripping a dock. One of the men in vests crouched behind her, saying nothing, his palm hovering near air by her shoulder without touching. Protection close without being cage. "Mom," Emily said, and the sound stitched the room with a bright thread. "I am here," Sarah said, and the air grew kinder. Richard drew in breath and found it empty. He looked to his men for a loaned sentence. They had none. The front man tipped his head toward the door, and then back, asking permission without taking it. Sarah answered with the smallest nod. He lifted one hand and made a gesture that was both welcome and boundary. "Stay there, little one," he said softly, and the softness filled the lobby more completely than anger had ever managed. Sarah set one foot forward and stopped, because standing was the promise of this minute. Emily's eyes measured the jacket and the bruise and the calm of her mother's mouth. The calm moved into her. She loosened her grip on the frame and let her hands fall. The man behind her rested his palm on the hinge instead. A small, reverent act, like guarding a threshold that had finally remembered its purpose. Far away, a siren unwound a thin, clear line of sound. Another siren braided to it. Two voices, finding each other. The engines outside did not interrupt. They kept their note, a bed where the new sound could breathe. The clock ticked again, and the tick felt less like glass and more like ink. "You hear that?" the man asked Richard, conversational as weather. "Help is already coming." Richard's mouth tried on shapes and threw them away. His eyes jumped from door to chandelier to watch to Sarah. The watch still kept his time. The room had chosen a different clock. Sarah let her shoulders lower a fraction. The leather whispered. She lifted the edge near her throat and settled it against skin that had known too much cold light. The fabric met the collar of her uniform and made a quiet promise to be ordinary about extraordinary things. "We stand," the man said again, "not for drama, not for victory, only to state what the bodies had already agreed to." The words reached the center of the lobby and became furniture. Sarah looked at the ring the mop had left. It had grown thin, nearly gone, an old circle turning itself back into air. Inside her, the opposite happened. A small circle tightened and brightened, a seal made by breath and will. Outside, tires rolled, rubber doing its humble work. A radio chattered up the block. The engines held their note as if spelling a low word the room already knew. The chandelier did not tremble. Light stood, glass stood, bodies stood. The building felt like a witness ready to sign. Sarah set her palm upon the seam of the jacket again, and did not need to check its meaning. She already knew. The engines outside held their patient note, the way a steady hand holds a lantern, and the lobby gathered itself around that sound. Sarah let her palms fall from the counter and felt the faint pull of the leather across her shoulders, warm where it touched the back of her neck. The jacket smelled of road and wind and an honesty the building had never learned. She breathed, and the breath did not splinter. It traveled the full length of her ribs and came home. The man stood a step ahead, shoulder offered like a quiet wall between her and the place Harm preferred to stand. He did not perform his body. He placed it. Behind him, the two figures at the doorway kept their posts, framed by streetlight and the pale bones of the entrance. The chandelier lifted its cold glitter as if to reclaim the room and failed. Tonight, the glitter was only decoration. Richard drew himself taller, in the way men do when height is required to replace steadiness. "This ends now," he said. "You will remove yourselves from my property. We will wait." The man answered. He did not raise his voice. He set it down where it belonged. "We will wait until she is safe." Richard showed his teeth without warmth. "You imagine this is rescue," he said, pitching the line toward the men behind him, as if they were an audience that could still be hired. "It is trespass. It is a mistake that will cost more than all your machines are worth." No one hired the sentence. Outside, the engines adjusted their idle, a metal patience passing between friends. The front doors breathed and admitted a slice of night that smelled like clean weather. Sarah could taste the cool on the back of her tongue, the way a storm announces itself to those who work outside. Richard crowded a half-step closer, heat pressed into air that had finally remembered how to be cool. "Walk out," he said, "or be dragged." "Do not," the man said, and the syllables settled between them like a painted line on a road. He did not move his feet. He did not lift a hand. He did not repeat himself. Sarah watched the exchange with the attention she had learned across years of after-hours cleaning, the kind of attention that reads a room by what is left behind. The shape of Richard's shoulders wrote frustration neat as a ledger. The stillness of the man wrote a sentence that required no punctuation beyond breath. From the executive corridor, voices rose and fell, a soft cluster of guests, deciding whether curiosity was worth the risk of proximity. The building carried the possibility forward, like current in a hidden wire. Sarah angled herself so the door, the clock, and the men were all within a single field. Minutes mattered. The thin, bright tick of the crystal clock had become a witness with a pen. "You brought a child into my lobby," Richard said, gripping a story he thought would turn the night back into his schedule. "At this hour, for this nonsense, you do not make terms here." "I do. I am here," Sarah said. The words did not need ornament. She did not offer apology to make them prettier or softer. She let the fact stand with its own spine. "No one dictates harm," the man said without looking back. "Not tonight." Richard laughed, and the laugh broke on the edges like glass under a hurried hand. "You think standing there makes you something," he said. "It makes you an obstruction. It makes you a liability. I will bury you in paper you cannot read." The engines answered with a small, courteous rumble, not threat and not theater. "Only wait." Sarah lifted the collar with 2 fingers and settled it again, feeling the seam that told the truth about how separate pieces can become one. The jacket did not transform her, it confirmed her. He pivoted from the man as if offended by the wall for being a wall, and faced Sarah the way a gambler faces a table. He cannot afford to leave. "Take off that jacket," he said. "Put it back where it belongs. Pick up the mop, finish the rail. When our guests arrive, you will keep your head down and your mouth closed, and your story to yourself." Sarah glanced toward the cart, at the folded cloth that wore the memory of her hands, at the rail that reflected the chandelier like a long signature. She let 1 second cross the clock and join the book of the night. "I will not return to harm," she said. "I will finish what is mine to finish." The man dipped his chin once, faithful as a seal pressed into warm wax. "Hear her," he told Richard. It was not a plea and not a warning. It was the price of the next minute. Richard lunged at the cart, and the small wheels scolded the marble with a chatter. He reached for the folded cloth with a hand that had never folded anything except money. Sarah saw the reach and set her own palm on the cloth first, not touching him, only making a map between his intention and the thing that belonged to her work. "Move," he said. "No," she said. The man altered the angle of his shoulder by the width of a breath. Not nearer, not farther, only enough to tell the room that a line had been seen and would be held. From far down the block a siren opened like wire plucked by steady fingers, thin and high, the kind of sound that writes itself on glass before it is seen. Another siren braided to it, 2 notes, bound by purpose. "You hear that?" the man asked. "Calm as weather talk among people who do not own the sky. Help is already on its way." "I called them," Richard said. He aimed ownership at the future, as if the phone carried title. "Maybe," the man said, "or maybe someone else did. We will see." Sarah felt the weave of the cloth under her palm, roughened by bleach and work, and folded it once more, not to hand to him, not to use, but to set on the cart in a shape that honored the thing. She moved at the pace of a person whose body belongs to her. Richard took the spray bottle instead, lemon bright and foolish in his manicured grip. He aimed at the brass and did not squeeze. He held the gesture like a prop in a small theater. When the man did not react, the bottle lowered, the air leaving the scene as if it had seen the string above the curtain. One of the suited men tried support and could not hold it. "We have a schedule," he murmured. "Investors and presentations. Perhaps we de-escalate and take this elsewhere." Richard did not care for the word that begins with D. It belongs to people who choose meeting over command. He kept his eyes on Sarah. "Take off that jacket," he said again, trimming each word as if grammar could cut a seam. "No," Sarah said. Her voice was a plate set on a table. The meal would be eaten. The man lifted his hand, not toward anyone, but to the space near his own chest, palm open in a small sign that usually belongs to traffic officers and church ushers. "Enough," said the hand, to Sarah's surprise. The room obeyed. Even the vents seemed to hush for 2 breaths. Outside, the engines kept their even bed of sound, and the sirens turned a corner and lengthened, the notes now a rope that knew which door to find. Sarah traced the city in her mind, the work blocks she knew from dawn buses and last trains, lights stacking red and green over empty intersections, windows without faces, streets that belong at night to workers and to those who hunt them. The rope grew thicker. It brushed the building. Richard stepped back from the cart, not in surrender, but in rehearsal for a new lie. He could tell later. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, speaking to the air as if it were a board of directors. "We will clear it. Everyone will go home. The tower will shine." The chandelier scattered its indifferent coins of light across the floor. Sarah remembered how many hours she had spent polishing those coins so a man could stand in them and pretend they meant him. The thought did not bruise now. It passed like a small cloud. The man glanced toward the door. The two riders there shifted and opened a space the size of a small child. Emily stood just inside the threshold, knees smudged, hair escaping, eyes bright and awake. The rider behind her laid his palm on the hinge again, a quiet ritual of care that touched nothing but made a promise anyway. "I am fine," Sarah told her. The words were warm and visible, then gone, and the air kept the warmth for a heartbeat more. Richard heard the child, and something mean flared across his face, like a match struck too close to thinner. He started toward the door without knowing his feet had chosen the route. The man took a half step forward, and the direct path vanished. "Do not," he said again, and the lobby agreed. "You are not the law," Richard said. The man did not argue position. He let the sirens speak law in the grammar of arrival. They were no longer rumor. They were measure and record. Sarah felt the sound sweep her skin the way cool water soothes without erasing the burn. It did not fix anything. It made repair possible. She turned the cart and clicked the brake and straightened the handles until the thing looked like a thing correctly put away. "Order keeps your name in your pocket," the old supervisor had said. Sarah pressed a palm to the counter. The stone kept its tiny pits and its indifferent truth. The clock let go another second, with a neat, bright tick. Richard aimed one more comfortable weapon. "If you like uniforms," he said, "you will love court. Perjury has a cost. False accusation has a cost. Saying the word hurt to a man like me has a cost you cannot imagine." Sarah thought of rent and breakfast, and socks worn thin at the heel, and thread learned at night to make holes close up into useful fabric. She thought of how men like this one price everything and value very little. Then she thought of a call log that would later wear a time in black ink, of the red on her cheek, of eyes that had watched it form, of a wrist that had been stopped from doing it again. Time could testify, time could convict, time could betray. But tonight it had decided to sign its name beside hers. "We are done," she said. The sentence swung on oiled hinges, final without noise. The man gave her a nod that meant witness and meant ally, and meant you do not stand alone in this minute. The figures by the door widened their stance by the width of a boot heel, making a frame that no arrogance could mistake for invitation. The sirens arrived in the glass's color, then movement, then the shape of accountability poured over the lobby like a wash of red and blue that did not flatter anyone. Richard inhaled to throw words at the lights, and found the words were smaller than he remembered. Sarah let her shoulders lower by a breath. The leather whispered at her collar. Outside, a car door closed with the solid thump of a tool used every day. Radios spoke in brisk syllables, questions and answers with no room for drama. The engines lowered their note in respect and left the center clear. The chandelier did not tremble. The light held. The tick of the clock sounded like ink again. Neat lines marching into a margin that had finally decided to matter. The building, which had spent its nights pretending to be a throne, looked briefly like a desk where facts could be written down. Sarah set her palm over the seam at her collarbone and felt the truth of joined pieces. "Stay," whispered the leather. She did. Red and blue climbed the lobby glass in slow tides, settling along the pillars like proof. The doors eased wider, and uniforms crossed the threshold with the measured calm of people who carry order the way a mason carries a level. Radios murmured clipped phrases at their shoulders. Small cameras blinked awake on their collars, a modest light that turned everything that followed into record, not rumor. The taller officer scanned the room once and let his gaze land on Sarah. His hands stayed open, palms visible at his sides. "Ma'am," he said, steady as a held plank. "Are you hurt?" The question did not prod or press. It offered a place to stand. Sarah kept her feet where the night had taught her to anchor them. She listened to her voice for a tremor and found none. "I am all right," she said. Then she shaped it with the precision the moment deserved. "My cheek. He hit me." She did not dress the sentence. She let it hold its edge. The second officer turned toward Richard and his companions and set a boundary with nothing but his hand. "Sir, please keep your hands visible and remain where you are." He faced the space between them as if it were a line he would repaint as often as necessary. Richard drew himself into the size of his suit. "Officers," he said, "these men have broken into my building. My employee is causing a disturbance. Remove them, and we will settle the rest." "We will see," said the second officer, not unkindly and not impressed. He did not borrow the lobby's former habit of trusting money more than a bruise. The taller officer lifted his chin towards Sarah. "May I approach?" "Ma'am." Permission kept the air clean. When she nodded, he moved close enough to see without crowding her breath. "May I document the injury?" She agreed. The collar camera gave a soft electronic chirp that sounded, to Sarah, like a clerk pulling a file. The officer spoke for the record in a cadence built to hold weight. "Body camera active. Visible swelling on the left cheek of female employee. Initial documentation." He raised a small light and offered it beside her face, careful not to sting her eyes. He did not touch her. He did not need to. "Thank you," he said in a way that made the words feel like care instead of habit. "Do you need medical attention right now?" "Not now," she said. "If I do later, I will ask." She felt the edges of the sentence seat into place. The leather across her shoulders held a quiet warmth, as if it had heard and approved. Behind her, the man who had stood for her did not step into the space the officers now occupied. He stayed where he belonged, a shoulder that had drawn a line and would not turn it into theater. He did not speak for her. He let her voice be fact. The second officer walked to the counter and kneeled to the glitter that still lived near its base. "Careful feet. Careful breath. Evidence marker," he said, and slid a small numbered tent from a pocket. He set it beside the largest shard. He drew a paper bag from a flat sleeve and opened it with respect for both the paper and the story it was about to carry. "Bagging glass from lobby floor near central counter," he said for the camera. "Edges sharp, likely from a stemmed vessel." He drew gloves tight with the snap of measured work and placed the fragments into the sack, not one by one as if each were sacred, not in a hurry as if none mattered, but with the pace of someone who knows that care can be both simple and exact. "This is nonsense," Richard said, a laugh catching on its own hook. "Broken glass in a lobby. Next, you will arrest me for dust." "Sir," said the second officer without heat, "please remain behind the inlay and keep your hands at your sides." He wrote the date and time along the lip of the bag in neat block letters, added his initials, folded the top twice, and sealed it with a strip that sang a brief paper song when his knuckle pressed the glue. Entry 1. Broken glass recovered. Sealed. Chain of custody initiates now. The words sat in the room with honest weight. They made a different kind of shine than crystal. Sarah listened to the tick of the crystal clock and heard ink instead of glass. The night had shifted from performance to record. She could feel it in her throat. The taller officer glanced toward the rider at her shoulder. "Thank you for keeping distance." "See her. Are you with her?" "We answered her daughter," the man said. "We will stand until she does not need us to." "Understood," said the officer. He turned back to Sarah. "Do you want them to remain while we take your statement?" "Yes," she said. "Thank you. Courtesy is a rope you hold when the river tries to pull you loose from yourself." Richard moved a step, the length of an old habit, and found the second officer already there. A palm up, patient as a stop sign planted in fresh concrete. "Sir, step back, please. Remain on the marble inlay. I am the injured party," Richard said, and flicked his wrist to point. His watch answered with a face that no longer controlled the room. He pointed anyway. "They handled me. They threatened me. They escalated my event." The taller officer did not turn to him. "Did you strike this woman?" he asked. The question placed like a doorway, not like an accusation. He waited one breath for the truth to volunteer. Then he looked to Sarah. "Ma'am, tell me what happened." "He hit me," Sarah said, the word willing to be said at last without carrying shame. "He yelled, he shoved, he threw the mop and reached again. He hit me in front of my daughter." The word daughter entered the air with a bright edge that cut through the leftover perfume of the lobby. The officer gave the camera the simple grammar of procedure. Statement of female employee indicates assault by male employer in presence of a minor. Visible injury documented. He lifted his pen. "Did anyone witness?" Sarah kept her eyes on him, and not on the men who had called themselves guests. "They watched," she said. "My daughter saw." The men at the door arrived when she ran to them. "We will need names," said the second officer, turning toward the suits. The men studied their shoes with a scholarship that arrived too late. The officer nodded toward the doorway. "Is that your child?" "Yes," Sarah said. "Let her stay there, please. She has been brave enough for one night. She is fine right here." The rider behind Emily said softly, palms still resting on the hinge, as if guarding the threshold itself and not only the child. The second officer stood, the paper bag sealed in his hand, and looked at Richard. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The sentence wore duty and nothing else. "This is absurd," Richard began, but the words had lost their old sponsors. The officer repeated the instruction. Repetition acted like a key. Richard hesitated just long enough for the truth to become visible, then turned, stiff with disbelief, at a world that would no longer tilt. The first cuff closed with a small metallic click that filled the lobby like a bell. The second followed with the same clean note. The taller officer read the rights that matter. Clauses built with care, each placed upon the last like stones, meant to carry weight for years. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed. Do you understand these rights as they have been read to you? "Lavier," Richard said, as if the word might buy different weather. "That is your right." The officer answered, neither impressed nor annoyed. He placed a guiding hand above the elbow and turned him toward the doors. Outside, the riders lowered their engines, another shade, leaving room in the air for the brass of the radios and the footfalls of process. Before they took him, the second officer faced Sarah again. "Do you feel safe if he leaves the building now? Would you like us to initiate a protective order tonight?" "He will not touch me again," Sarah said. The sentence leaned on record, not on hope. "Yes, please begin it. We will start the paperwork now," the officer said. "A victim advocate will contact you. Do you have a safe place to stay?" Sarah felt the jacket answer before her mouth did. "We will manage," she said, and the rider gave a small nod that put weight under the words, so they did not drift. The taller officer pulled a card from a sleeve pocket and wrote a case number in careful strokes. He spoke the number aloud for the camera, not in digits but in steady word, then handed the card to Sarah. "Keep this," he said. "This is the reference for everything that follows. If anyone asks you to repeat yourself, you can hand them this. Would you like us to call anyone for you?" "No," she said. She had already called the part of herself that answered. It had arrived. One of the suited men lifted a hand halfway. A boy gestured, trapped in an expensive tie. "I did not see the start," he muttered quickly. "I heard raised voices. Then glass broke. Then the doors opened. He stared back at his shoes, grateful to have described sequence and not courage. "We will take statements in the corridor," said the second officer, "one at a time." He returned to Richard. "We will walk now." They walked. The sound of their steps was ordinary and final, heel and toe, stone accepting the truth of weight. The hand at Richard's arm was firm and not cruel. The glass returned the red and blue in sheets across his suit, a kind of shine that did not flatter. Sarah did not follow. She kept her hands on the edge of the counter as the uniforms passed the doorway where Emily stood small and steady. Richard turned his head to cast a look that used to work and found it had no buyer. No one bent to pick it up. Outside, the patrol car waited with its mouth open, patient as a tool. A nearby door closed with a deep, practical thump that made even the chandelier reconsider itself. The far door opened to receive him and shut again with the same unsentimental finality. Not vengeance, not theater, procedure. For a breath, the lobby felt taller, as if the building itself had stood up straight after years of posing. The officers did not hurry. They did not linger. They finished what they began. The taller officer returned to Sarah with the same measured courtesy he had brought through the door. "Ma'am," he said, "I will take a brief recorded statement now, and a fuller one later if you wish. Then we will give you shelter information and contacts. Do you need a moment?" Sarah looked to the entrance. Emily's eyes were fixed on her, clear and bright. The rider's hand still rested at the hinge like a benediction. Sarah lifted her fingers in a small wave, a stitch that tied them all again. "I am ready," she said. The pen clicked, a crisp sound that had come to mean truth. "State your name for the record, please." "Sarah Thompson," she said. The clock's thin tick matched the syllables like a clerk initialing a ledger. Red and blue breathed across the ceiling and down the walls. The leather at her collar whispered once, not language, just loyalty. And she stood as the story entered ink. She told it straight, work and order and reach and refusal, a slap that would not be renamed, the mop ring shrinking like a shadow that had lost its nerve, the small feet on stone and the engines that chose patience instead of noise. The officer did not hurry her. His notes kept pace with her breath. The camera blinked its modest agreement. When she finished, he nodded to the lens and then to her. "Thank you. That will do for now. We will contact you by morning. If you need us sooner, call the number on the card. Would you like an escort to your vehicle or to the street? We can arrange transport if you prefer." "We will walk," Sarah said. The word "we" did not wobble. It did not ask permission to exist. It already did. The officers moved to the doors, one ahead, one behind. Nothing loud, everything careful. Outside, the engine settled to a low hum that left room for goodbyes and for beginning. The chandelier was once again only cut glass and bulbs. The clock wrote another neat second. Ink, not glass. Sarah turned toward the threshold. Emily unclenched her small fists and stepped into the light. The blue dress, a deeper blue under the wash of the cruisers. The rider near her did not touch either of them. Presence was enough. The patrol car idled beyond the steps, a patient machine with other streets to visit. A door closed somewhere. The same steady thump as before, and the night took the sound and carried it away. Sarah touched the seam at her collarbone, where separate pieces had been joined into something that could hold. Then she took the first step, and the building, stripped of its throne pretensions, behaved like a door should. It let her pass. Night settled into the motel like a blanket someone finally remembered to pull up. Sarah closed the door with the quiet care of a nurse and felt the latch catch, a small, honest sound that told the room it belonged to them for now. Emily's hand was warm inside hers, the warmth of a child who has run too far and wants at last to stop. The leather jacket rested across the second chair, a dark folded presence that smelled of wind and road, and a kind of clean that never comes out of a bottle. The air tasted of cheap soap and new safety. It was enough. Outside, a cruiser idled past with its lights softened to a gentle breathing, red then blue, then red, color washed thin as watercolor along the curtains. The officer who had brought them up the stairs had said he would circle twice before midnight and twice after, and though Sarah knew the exact count did not matter, the promise did. Promises have their own kind of arithmetic. She stood a moment longer with her palm on the door, feeling the wood cool under her skin, not to check the lock again but to let her body understand that the lock existed. Emily climbed onto the nearer bed, with the slow solemnity children use when they are trying to be older than they are. She tucked her knees into the space between pillows and looked at the nightstand clock, which insisted stubbornly on the wrong hour, each bright segment stating its case with great confidence. Time can be mistaken, Sarah thought. Record is how you fix it. She slipped the officer's card from her pocket and set it beside the clock, letting the printed case number anchor the stubborn glow. The numbers were only ink, but they had the weight of a small metal key. "Are we safe here?" Emily asked, not whispering, not declaring, only laying the question down like a blanket to see if it covered all the corners. "We are safe for this night," Sarah said. "Tomorrow we will build the next one." Her voice did not tremble when she said tomorrow. The word set its feet. On the dresser sat the plain paper sack the rider had left, a soft rectangle of kindness. Sarah opened it slowly, the way one opens a letter, not to delay the food but to honor the person who thought of it. A sandwich wrapped in wax paper, a bottle of water still beaded from the cooler, and a small juice box with a straw taped to its side. The juice made Emily sit up a fraction taller, the way sunlight moves across a wall. Their names were nowhere on the sack. The world had other ways to sign a gift. "Eat a little," Sarah said. The child obeyed not because of the word but because the voice behind it was steady. She took careful bites and drank the small sweet drink and leaned again into her mother's side. The way people lean into a railing when the sea is rougher than the deck. The phone on the little table gave a soft insect buzz. Sarah answered and heard a woman introduce herself with a first name and a role. "Advocate," she said, in a voice both firm and kind, the sort of voice that knows which forms require ink and which require patience. She spoke the case number aloud in clear syllables that matched the print on the card. She confirmed the first report time and the time of the initial call, each spoken in words, not digits, as if to remind the night that language can also count. "Tomorrow morning," the advocate said, "we can meet where you like. We will talk about housing options, workplace rights, emergency orders, and what you want to do next. Tonight, you do not have to do anything but sleep." "Sleep will come," Sarah said, and for once, the sentence did not have to work for its truth. "Thank you. You did well," the advocate said. "I am sorry that doing well was required. I will call again after breakfast. If you do not pick up, I will try again. You do not have to be polite to fear. You can hang up on it." When the call ended, Sarah set the phone face down and listened to the room breathe. Somewhere beyond the parking lot, a train exhaled a long, friendly sigh. Steele, talking to Steele about schedules, kept. The sound did not ask for attention. It offered ordinary life as evidence. She washed her face in water that smelled faintly of the pipes and dabbed her cheek with the corner of a towel, noticing how the heat had become a throb, and the throb had become only presence. Pain, like anger, is smaller when named. In the mirror she saw not the slap, but the woman who had stood still and spoken plain. Habit had once told her to drop her eyes. Habit was learning new work. Emily had finished the sandwich with the seriousness of a task. She lay down and pulled the blanket to her chin and turned her face toward the wall where the light lifted and fell, red then blue then red, like a quiet heartbeat at the edge of a dream. "Will they come back if we need them?" she asked, meaning the officers and the riders and all the sudden strangers who had behaved like family. "We will call," Sarah said, "and people will answer." She believed it enough to let the words into the room. She turned off the lamp. The dark was not empty. It held the soft scrape of a car in the lot, the faint sigh of the little blower over the door, the whisper of fabric when Emily rolled toward her and curled one hand beneath her shoulder. It held the memory of the pen click and the seal pressed to paper and the little numbered tent on the bright floor, a tiny white triangle with a black number that looked, even in memory, like a flag planted on a small new country. She closed her eyes and let the image drift until it took its place among older images that no longer owned the night. Sleep came not as a fall but as a tide. When it receded, gray had spread along the edges of the curtain, and the room had that particular early light that makes even cheap furniture look honest. The cruiser eased past once, unhurried, the car speaking in low mechanical vowels to any trouble that might be listening. Trouble did not answer. A morning bird practiced a single note, somewhere near the ice machine. Sarah sat up without rushing her bones. She smoothed the blanket and watched Emily breathe, the small ribs rising and falling like a tide on a quiet day. She touched the child's hair and said the word breakfast into the room like a gentle bell. Emily blinked, considerate, and smiled the kind of morning smile that forgives the world its nights. They washed in the small bathroom, the mirror fogging at the edges and clearing again, the way doubt fogs and clears when met with air. Sarah folded the towel and hung it as if it were already theirs. The jacket returned to her shoulders with the easy weight of a known friend. It did not pretend to be armor. It reminded her she had a spine. Downstairs the air smelled like batter and warmth. The diner across the street wore a neon sign that blinked its own slow language. The same rider from the night before stood by the door with a togo tray and a not-quite smile that preferred to stay near the eyes. "Pancakes," he said simply, and set the tray on the counter so she could see there were 2 stacks and a small cup of berries that looked like treasure on a weekday. He did not reach for money. He lifted his chin at the waitress, who answered with a tiny salute made of coffee pot steam. "Good morning," the waitress said to Emily, and the greeting sounded like what it was, an invitation to belong. The child gave her name in shy syllables and received a syrup packet like a medal. Sarah remembered the officer's voice, naming the pancakes the night before, and felt the echo land exactly where it had been aimed. They ate in the small booth by the window, fork against plate, coupe against saucer, the pleasant grammar of an ordinary morning. The riders kept their engines sleeping and took their coffee like men who had learned the difference between noise and presence. A cruiser rolled by and did not stop. It did not need to. The patrol checked without checking in, a kindness that respects both safety and pride. The phone buzzed again. The advocate's voice warmed the line. "Good morning. If you are ready, I can meet you outside the diner in 15 minutes. We can walk to the outreach office together. It is 2 blocks and 1 light. On the way, we will talk about what you want, not what you owe." "We are ready," Sarah said, and she meant the plural. She wiped Emily's fingers carefully and tucked the case card back into her pocket, where it rested against the seam like a small, sturdy bone. They walked with the advocate along a street that smelled of bread from a bakery and damp newspaper from a rack that had been filled before dawn. The woman moved at their pace, not faster, not slower. She pointed out the office by describing the mural on the wall rather than the sign, as if to say the place had a heart as well as a name. Inside, the lights were soft and the chairs did not punish backs. A kettle hissed. A bulletin board held cards with numbers in large letters and words that offered shelter, food, counseling, work, and, perhaps most important, time. Sarah sat where invited and listened as the advocate drew the map, emergency order today, a housing option that did not come with strings, a list of clinics and a promise to call ahead, so the waiting room would not have to hold their whole story. Conversations with a workplace liaison who could translate law into protection. A support group she could leave early without guilt. Everything said without pity. Everything offered without price. The woman slid a paper across the table that summarized the plan in plain language. Here is what we do first. Here is what waits. Here is what can be ignored. Do I have to tell it again? Sarah asked, meaning the describing, the explaining, the ritual repetition that wears a person down to a nub. Not today, the advocate said. The report is enough for what we are doing now. When someone insists, you show them the number. She tapped the card. You can keep your words for yourself until you choose otherwise. Silence is also a right. Emily sat at a low table, drawing with a dull pencil, making circles that became wheels, that became something with handles. The writer had folded the first drawing into his vest the night before. This one she handed to her mother with both hands. It showed 3 figures under a line of light, one tall and 2 smaller, and a rectangle with a tiny triangle on it. The little numbered tent drawn again, a flag that meant proof. Sarah felt the picture enter her like a drink of clear water. They signed where the advocate pointed, not to surrender anything but to claim it. The woman pressed a stamp to a form, and the sound was a small, solid thud. Official, without fuss. Sarah kept her shoulders low. She did not brace for impact. There was none. When they stepped back into the day, the light had sharpened and the air carried a faint sweetness from the bakery window, opened a hand's width. A patrol car drifted by, unhurried. 2 faces inside turned toward the street. The way people look at a neighborhood they know. The riders were gone about their business. Presence does not become possession. It comes, it steadies, it leaves room. What happens now? Emily asked, in the piping voice of children who trust schedules more than fate. Now we go look at a small apartment, the advocate said. It is on a street with trees and a bakery below. The rent is covered for a while. Neighbors bring too much bread. She smiled without apology for the sweetness of her own sentence. Sarah looked down at her daughter, at the pencil smudge on her knuckle, at the way hope had begun to live in her posture, and not just in her eyes. She touched the seam of the jacket near her collarbone, and felt the proof that separate pieces can be joined into something that holds. The night had taught her how to stand. The morning would teach her how to move. They started down the block together, the advocate at one side and the child at the other, a triangle with its own small number, not a tent on a floor but a shape in the street that said, "Here are 3 people walking toward a door." A bus sighed at the corner. A pigeon lifted and settled again. Somewhere a phone rang and someone answered, the ordinary exchange that builds a day. Sarah matched her step to the sound and did not hurry. She had waited a long time to walk at this pace. Night finished its long sentence in the motel and placed a quiet period on the room. Sarah sat with her back against the headboard, Emily sleeping along her side, the leather jacket folded on the chair like a patient sentinel. The card from the officer lay beside the stubborn clock, its printed case number, doing the work of a small anchor. She did not reread it. Knowing it was there steadied her as surely as a handrail in a stairwell. Her phone hummed in the soft pocket of the dark. The advocate's voice arrived warm and level, carrying the care of a person who knows which doors open with patience and which open with paper. "We filed the petition," the voice said. "An on-call judge is reading. I will call again when the page is signed. You do not need to answer unless you want to hear it when it happens. You deserve rest." "Thank you," Sarah said, and the words felt like a tool lifted correctly, not an apology offered by habit. She set the phone down and pictured what she could not see. Somewhere across the city, a printer pushed paper in reliable inches. A light above a camera held a steady dot, and a plastic bin swallowed a watch with a practical clatter. In another room, the bagged shard of glass rested inside its brown sleeve, with a tag like a small flag. Someone wrote the hour in block letters and underlined it once. Record was not beautiful, but it did not need to be. It had the beauty of a level beam. The phone hummed again. The advocate's voice carried a quiet brightness. "The order is signed, effective tonight. He is barred from your person, your child, your work, and your place of rest. If he approaches, you call. If he calls, you do not answer. You hold up the number and let the law stand in the doorway." Sarah closed her eyes and saw a blue signature cross a white page like a clean river. Time could testify, she thought. Time could also protect. Emily shifted, not with fear, only to claim more of the blanket. The child's breath evened. Sarah switched off the lamp. Outside, a cruiser drifted past with its colors softened, red, then blue, then red again. A slow breathing that the thin curtains could not keep from entering the room. A far train laid down a long sigh. Not weary, simply certain. Sleep came to her with the feeling of a door that has learned how to close without slamming. Morning did not ask permission. Pale light slid along the seam of the curtain and made a straight road across the carpet. A bird tried one note and then a better one. The room smelled faintly of soap and air that had not been lied to. Sarah woke with her hand resting on Emily's hair, and with the unremarkable relief of finding that nothing had been taken while she slept. A gentle knock tapped the door. The rider waited in the walkway until she answered, then set a tray on the dresser and stepped back. "Pancakes," he said, "and coffee, and fruit." He did not say anything about protection or rescue. Presence was the only grammar he chose. The door and the air kept their stillness after he left. They ate at the little table, forks and cups, making the good sounds of a plain morning. The phone hummed, and the advocate suggested a short walk to an office where chairs did not punish backs, and a kettle hissed like a friendly cat. On the way, the advocate said, "We will stop by the precinct counter. A clerk will give you a small envelope with your order and spare cards. You can hand them across any conversation that asks for your pain a second time." At the desk behind glass, a clerk spoke Sarah's name without flattening it, and slid the envelope as if passing a thing that mattered. He folded a copy of the first page of the report with careful hands, and pointed to the line that held the case number in dark print. "If anyone insists that you explain yourself," he said, "point to this. You are allowed to keep your words until you choose to spend them." He lowered his voice just enough to fit through the slot with the papers. "We know the type who thinks certainty is the same as truth. Certainty is loud. Truth is patient. Truth wins." The outreach office lived behind a mural of bright leaves on a brick wall. Inside, light fell softly, and no one made their voices thin with pity. The advocate laid out a plan that sounded like tasks rather than tests. Today, the emergency order copies and the first calls, then housing and work conversations in their time. You can say no to furniture you do not want. You can say no to stories you do not want to tell. Silence is also a right. Emily drew at a low table, her pencil turning circles into wheels, into a cart with a small triangle on it, the little numbered tent of proof already making a home in her mind. They walked to Oak Street, Trees stitched shade across the sidewalk, and a bakery let steam kiss the window. The building was unremarkable in the exact way Sarah craved. The key turned with a clean click that sounded like permission, not permission granted by another person, but permission granted by a life that had finally stopped arguing with itself. The apartment was a careful rectangle, a kitchen that wanted to be helpful, an east window that accepted light instead of showing it off. Emily spun once and stopped with her palm on the wall, as if to make a pact. "Windows," she said. "We can see the bread place." The advocate set a folder on the counter. Inside it, large, clear words lived on ordinary paper. "Call if," "do not answer when," "step back from," "step toward." Say only this sentence: "Do not sign what you do not understand." The list felt like choreography given to a strong body, healing from someone else's rhythm. Sarah touched the sill. The wood was plain. Plain felt like mercy. A gentle knock brought a neighbor with a pot. "Welcome," the woman said, setting the handle in Sarah's palm, and left without collecting a story that was not hers to carry. Later, the riders came and climbed the stairs with 2 boxes, one of dishes that had already known mornings, and one of a blanket and mismatched mugs. The man who had given her his jacket touched the door frame as if to bless the wood, and kept no footprint of authority behind. "This is ours," he said to the jacket with a small tap. "And this is yours," he added to the doorway, as if naming 2 truths and giving both permission to remain. In the afternoon, the advocate returned with another page. The distance line on the order now expanded to include this new address. She showed Sarah where the line lived in the system that patrol cars could see. "Not as threat, as promise. You do not owe vigilance every hour," she said. "The system will do its share. Let it." They stood at the window together and watched the block behave like a block. A bus sighed and opened its doors. A pigeon considered the edge of a rooftop with the drama of a small king, and then did nothing at all. The bakery slid a tray to a cooling rack with the pleasant sound of work finishing a sentence. Sarah pressed her fingers to the seam of the jacket near her collarbone and felt the quiet strength of joined pieces. She had been taught to think of seams as weaknesses. Today they looked like craft, like intention, like the visible truth that kept a thing whole. Her phone hummed one last time. The advocate again, brief and satisfied. "The body camera files are secure. The timestamps match what we mark. If rumor arrives, record will answer. Someone is keeping your cry exactly where it needs to live. You can place your head under your own roof tonight without bargaining with fear." "Thank you," Sarah said. She placed the case card on the sill, as if setting a small guardian at the window. Emily stood on tiptoe to look out at the street, and said our roof with the seriousness of a promise. The afternoon lengthened. A patrol car glided by without needing to pause. A rider's engine stitched a quiet line of sound along the curb, and then unstitched itself as it left. In a drawer across town, a thin file took on the weight of ink. In a courtroom, someday not far, a stamp would press down with its square, honest song. In this room, the air learned the names of 2 people who would not be moved by anyone else's temper again. Sarah took a breath that belonged to her, and wrote a small list on the back of an envelope. Bread, soap, 2 pillows. Then she added a final word that made her smile because it sounded like a boundary more than a decoration. Frame, not to cover a wall, but to mark the edge of a life that had chosen its shape. She slid the envelope beneath the case card so the papers touched. 2 modest proofs pressed together. Evening would come, and with it the pleasant tired of a day that did not require apologies. She crossed the floor without bracing for a voice, and felt the simple rightness of her steps. Some victories are loud, Some are a woman walking the length of her own room at the pace she chooses. Seams holding, roof certain, record ready to answer any knock that forgets its manners. Morning reached the east window and unfolded across the small apartment like a careful sheet, tugged smooth by a gentle hand. The glass did not brag about the light, it simply accepted it. Sarah woke to the warm ghost of bread rising from the bakery below, and the steady weight of the leather jacket resting on the chair as if it had learned the posture of patience. Emily slept, sprawled without worry, one small heel peeking from the blanket the riders had carried upstairs, a quiet proof that a body can rest when a room does not demand an explanation. On the sill lay the case card beside the little torn envelope, where Sarah had written her first list: bread, soap, 2 pillows, frame. She touched the card with one fingertip, not to test reality but to greet it. Down on Oak Street, a bus sighed. A door answered with a thump that sounded honest, and the bell of the bakery chimed once, as if the neighborhood kept time with kindness. She filled the kettle and listened to its early breath become a soft hiss. Steam blurred a quick oval on the pane and thinned again, like fear named, and asked to leave. When the water grew steady and certain, she set 2 mugs on the counter and opened the door to the hall for fresh air. A newspaper lay on the top stair, bound with a red elastic that held too loosely to be proud. She hesitated, then picked it up the way one lifts a letter addressed to a name they have decided to keep. The front page did not shout. In the center, a photograph held the tower's glass, lit by the wash of patrol colors. Beneath it, a man in a fine suit had his wrists arranged in the plain grammar of consequence. The headline spoke in firm, even words: Billionaire detained after alleged assault at own high-rise. Sarah's eyes found the caption, a line of type that carried weight without noise. Arrest recorded on officer body camera. Initial call time documented at 20:42. She read it once, then again, hearing the advocate's calm cadence in each measured phrase. Record held. Rumor moved aside. She did not cheer. She did not flinch. She set the paper on the counter like a guest who deserved coffee, and stepped back to let the room include it. In the bed, Emily stirred and propped herself on one elbow. Hair, a sleepy halo. "Are we still here?" she asked, the question small and entire, as if the apartment might dissolve without witness. "We are still here," Sarah said. The certainty in her own voice startled her by not startling her at all. "Read to me," Emily said, pointing at the paper, with the solemn authority of a child who has learned that truth can be printed. Sarah skimmed and chose sentences that carried fact without feeding spectacle. Names of officers, dates and hours. The phrase, initial intake of evidence, which sounded like shelving in a warehouse, but felt like an open pair of hands. Emily listened with grave attention, as if each clean word added a brick to a wall she could sleep against. "Does this mean he cannot come here?" Emily asked, meaning both this room and any room where her mother might stand. Sarah lifted the folder the advocate had left and opened to the page she knew already by heart. Her finger came down on the distance clause, a circle drawn in language that patrols could see. "It means this," she said. "It is signed. It lives in the system. If he steps near that circle, the law will stand between." Emily accepted the fence she could not see with the serenity of a child who trusts well-built things. She reached for a pencil and drew a neat square beneath a roofline and placed a tiny triangle inside it, the little tent of proof that had become their private emblem. Above it she printed, "Careful and brave, our roof." The words fit the wall without effort. A knock sounded, not timid, not bold. Sarah opened the door to the neighbor from yesterday, holding a dented tin in both hands, as if it were a relic. "Muffins," the woman said, "some with raisins, some without. Welcome to the floor." She did not lean to look past Sarah. She did not ask for a story in exchange for sugar. Sarah took the tin and felt the warmth of a different oven settle into the apartment like a blessing. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt like the first line of a home's history. By late morning, the phone hummed. An assistant district attorney introduced herself in square, respectful syllables, the voice of a person who has learned to set files down gently. "We have the report," she said. "We have the body camera recordings and the photographs. We would like to schedule a statement at your pace. Not today unless you choose. Not tomorrow unless you are ready." The phrase "at your pace" did not sound like courtesy. It sounded like practice earned in rooms where people had been hurried before their breath was ready to carry the load. "At my pace," Sarah said, the words set like a brick, not heavy, just important. The attorney thanked her without turning gratitude into debt. She gave a number, a range of hours, and one more sentence that felt like a door quietly locked against weather. "Your file is not a rumor. If anyone asks you to verify yourself with pain, point to the record, and we will speak." The advocate texted to say she would bring printed copies because some counters trust paper the way old men trust cash. When she arrived, the pages still warm. She smoothed them with her palm as if laying a cloth for a careful meal. "Here," she said, tapping the stamp, square and blue, the clerk's conviction pressed into pulp. "Here," she said, tapping the signature, a river of ink drawn by a hand that understood what a line can hold. "And here," she said, tapping the distance clause again. "This is not an idea. It is instruction. If anyone waters it down with 'be reasonable' when they mean 'be quiet,' you do not drink from that cup." In the stairwell, the bakery bell kept chiming, a bright little clock, not the crystal clock that had once owned the lobby, but a neighborhood timepiece that measured loaves into afternoons. The advocate's portable printer clacked and whirred and offered a small card heavy with the case number and the first lines of the order. "Keep one on the sill and one in your pocket," she said. "You do not have to carry law in your throat. You can show it." Sarah slid one card behind the list on the sill, so its edge peeked out like a bookmark in a book worth finishing. She tucked the other into the inside pocket of the jacket, where it settled against the lining like a coin a traveler keeps for a sure ride home. An email arrived from a quiet address with a devoted subject line: "Workplace Liaison." The message explained, in plain, untricky words, how absence could be protected, how wages could be reclaimed, how policies might be made to behave. "If you wish," the liaison wrote, "I can contact your employer, not to apologize for you, but to make the boundaries obvious. We can also coordinate with others who have reached out." Others. The word lifted the room. Beneath the note sat a second email with a few names she knew from the quiet economy of the service elevator. "We saw," it read, "we are ready to speak if it helps. We did not have words until last night." The subject line carried the little case number like a modest flag. Sarah answered carefully, "Thank you. Speak when you choose. Keep the number. Keep your sleep." Then she added one sentence that had become the only rule she trusted. "If anyone says 'be reasonable' when they mean 'be quiet,' you can hand them the card." By mid-afternoon, the bakery television murmured a short segment. The anchor spoke without appetite for spectacle. The pictures were only the tower and a corridor of polished stone and two officers walking with a man whose mouth moved without moving the room. The banner beneath repeated the quiet spine of the paper. "Alleged assault, recorded." When it ended, the baker asked a patron if her scones had turned out. The block resuming its ordinary braid of flour and talk and measured justice. The attorney called once more with the map of what comes next. Intake complete. File placed for review. Body camera flagged as primary evidence, with continuous recording. Forensics logged the glass. Edges noted. Origin marked. The phrases wore the clothes of form, but they steadied the day like bricks laid true. "Do you have hours that must be protected from calls?" the attorney asked. "Because a child still needs dinner and bath and story, protect those hours," Sarah said. "Done," the attorney answered, and meant it. Light slid across the wall toward the patch Emily had claimed for drawings. 2 new pages joined the first, each carrying the small triangle of proof, one under a roofline, one near a door, like gentle sentries who preferred paper to swords. "We will put the frame here," Emily said, pointing to the blank center. "For what?" Sarah asked, wanting to hear the answer aloud. "For the card," Emily said, "and the headline, and the picture where you are not afraid." Evening warmed the street. The neighbor laughed on the stoop into a phone, the kind of laughter that forgives the world for needing paperwork. The bakery closed with a breath of flour that looked like confetti. A patrol car drifted by without theater. 2 cups, steaming brief clouds on the glass. Somewhere in a courthouse, a stamp pressed down on another page with that squared final sound that had begun to feel like a benediction. Sarah stood at the window and touched the seam of the jacket at her collarbone. The small join that kept the piece whole. She thought of the lobby, and the numbered tent, and the moment when sound had turned into record. In a precinct drawer, a file learned her name without stealing it. On the sill, a card waited. Not a sword, not a permission slip, only a square of paper that could make certain kinds of noise stop. She turned to the wall where the frame would hang, and pictured a blue signature and a neat stamp, and heard the advocate's sentence settle again like truth. Taking a seat. "Your file is not a rumor." She slid the newspaper so it touched the card, shoulder to shoulder. Some things deserve a night on the sill before they take their place on the wall. She hung the jacket by the door so it could learn the smell of bread and the rhythm of ordinary arrivals. Emily tugged her sleeve for dinner, and Sarah followed to the little kitchen where the kettle always knew what to do. This day had revealed what needed saying, not in spectacle, not in speeches, but in paper and stamp and careful voices. It was enough. It was how a life begins to hold. Morning settled on the apartment like a measured breath, and held. The east window did not perform. It quietly admitted light and let it soften across the small room until edges turned kind. Sarah stood at the counter with the case card on the sill and the torn envelope beneath it, the little list that had guided her hands through the last day. Bread and soap and pillows and a frame. She touched the square card as if greeting a colleague who had shown up on time. It answered with its simple weight. Emily arranged her drawings along the wall, aligning corners with the careful eye of someone who has decided where things belong. Each page carried the small triangle of proof inside a square, their private tent. Today she shaded a narrow rectangle above the tent and said frame without looking away, as though naming a shape could help the world remember its duties. The kettle sighed, and the bakery bell below chimed once, a tiny promise that the block would keep its pace. The phone hummed on the counter. A message from the liaison waited with calm word. Documents sent to the tower's management, written acknowledgement of the order received, all communication to flow through council, not through you. The note ended with that steady phrase, "At your pace." The language fit the apartment. It fit the way her chest rose and fell. She replied with thanks, and a request that every exchange be kept in writing. Evidence lived in her now as posture rather than fear. The advocate texted that she would stop by with copies and a few optional forms to make the next steps human. No rush. She wrote, "Your pace." The words were not a slogan. They were a truth learned in rooms where breath had to be protected like light. A knock brought the riders to the threshold with a flat parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. A shelf, the taller one said, and a bag of screws. We can mount it or leave it. Your say. Sarah looked at the blank space where Emily had pointed yesterday and felt the day tilt toward form. Please mount it, she said. Thank you. They worked with the silence of people who consider noise a tool to be used sparingly. A level rested on the plaster like a small law. Pencil marks made quiet commas. The drill spoke once and then again, not loud, not boastful, only the sound of intention finding the stud it needed. When the shelf settled where wall met plan, the rider pressed it with the heel of a hand, to be sure a promise would hold. He stepped back and did not ask for praise. He looked to her for a nod that would make the thing hers. It is right, she said. He tipped 2 fingers and placed the spare screws on the counter. Coffee, he asked, half a ritual, but shook his head with a small smile and went downstairs to fetch his own. His glance lingered on Emily's drawings. Good lines, he said, meaning it, and left the doorway as lightly as he had filled it. Emily smoothed a palm along the new wood, as if reading a sentence that had been written for her. She lifted the first drawing and looked towards Sarah. Sarah fetched tape, and together they fixed the page in the place where a frame would one day live. The paper held, the room adjusted its breath, and seemed to understand. Late morning brought the advocate with a folder and a portable printer in her satchel. She set the stack on the counter and spread the papers with the patience of someone setting a careful meal. Copies of the protective order, stamped and signed, a release to allow the liaison to speak precisely for her. A short form for an emergency fund that translated into groceries and transit rather than speeches and pity. The advocate explained each page in sentences that did not test anyone. Sign here if it is what you want. Keep this copy. The stamp means a clerk has taken responsibility for the hour. Sarah initialed where clarity lived, and paused where clarity had not yet arrived. The advocate nodded at the pauses, as if listening to a heartbeat. At your pace, she said again, and the phrase did not dull with use. The portable printer chattered and produced 2 small cards with the case number and the first lines of the order. One can stand in the doorway, the advocate said with a soft smile. One stays in your pocket. Let paper do the talking when your breath belongs to the rest of your day. The neighbor returned with a square table that had already known a lifetime of cups and elbows. My sister is moving, she said, and insists this table wants morning light. If it does not suit, the hallway will babysit it until it finds another home. Sarah set the table near the east window where light behaved. The neighbor tugged the lamp chain, and the bulb answered with warm patience. Good, she said, and withdrew without collecting a story. A new email from the liaison arrived with the quiet tone that had become its own kind of shelter. The tower's management had confirmed in writing that no contact would be made and that all matters would move through council. The message added one sentence that felt like a hand on a shoulder. If anyone suggests forgiveness as a shortcut for procedure, forward the message to me. We can carry the papers so you can carry your day. Sarah printed the note and slid it into the folder behind the order. The folder had begun to feel like a spine she could choose to show or keep covered. Near afternoon, the phone rang with a voice from the community center a few blocks farther than the bakery. The director introduced herself with the energy of someone who remembers names and how people take their coffee. She described a role that sounded honest, mornings with facilities and the front desk, fair pay and benefits that protected the ordinary mercies, a schedule that respected dinner and bath and story. We can start next week, she said, or hold the place until your breath says yes. We value showing up, and we value rest. Both build a place. Sarah looked at the wall where the drawing stood in for a frame. She looked at Emily tracing the seam of the shelf with a fingertip. She looked at the jacket on the hook by the door. Yes, she said, and the word did not rush out of her. It took its time and landed where it should. The director smiled through the line in a way Sarah could hear. A packet will wait at the front desk tomorrow. Bring yourself. We will handle the rest together. We will take your picture on a day you choose. They marked the moment in small sugar at the bakery. The bell chimed. The air smelled of flour leaning into heat. The owner nodded the way people nod when they have decided to learn your name without taking it. 2 treats, she said, the price spoken with the soft pride of fair exchange. At the corner table, an old man folded a newspaper without wielding it. A patrol car rolled past the window, like any other car that belonged to the street. Back upstairs, afternoon leaned toward evening, and the light on the wall warmed from clear to honey. The assistant district attorney called with an update that sounded like bricks placed straight. Intake review complete. A preliminary hearing scheduled on a day the calendar named in words rather than numbers. Your presence is not required. If you wish to attend, I will sit beside you. If you wish not to, I will call after and give you only the facts that matter, and none of the noise. Protect your hours. The law can walk on its own legs for a while. Thank you, Sarah said, and meant it for more than a call. She closed the phone and let the room hold quiet on purpose. Emily cut a neat window from scrap paper and taped it over the drawing so the little tent could peek through. Now it looks like it lives there, she said. Sarah nodded at the rightness of the child's eye. Evening carried the neighbor back with a second-hand rug rolled like memory. It unfurled with the old grace of wool that has forgiven other rooms, and decided to forgive this one too. The floor took on a hush that made footsteps sound like belonging. The shelf held the folder and the case card, and the drawing where Roof was written in brave letters. The lamp pooled amber light, until the room looked like a place committed to remembering tomorrow without effort. Sarah opened the folder again, not out of worry, out of ceremony. She lifted each page with deliberate hands. The order, the liaison's letter, the email printed in simple black, the compact card with its square language, the short note where she had written her own name without flinching. She thought of the lobby, and the numbered tent, and the red dot on a camera that had burned a clean record into the dark. She thought of the level line of the shelf, the exact bite of the screws, the neighbor who offered a table, and then left the room to its own story. Execution, she thought, not of punishment, of building, step on step, paper aligned with purpose, a room arranged to hold a life so that a life can hold itself. She wrote a fresh list on the envelope under the word frame: laundry soap, a small plant for the sill, a picture hook when the time is right. She did not write courage. She had no need to shop for it. It already lived in the seam of the jacket and in the habit of her breath, and in the ordinary way she could now say yes to a day that had asked for her and not for her apology. Night arrived without threat. It settled into corners like a respectful guest. The bakery closed with the soft clatter of trays and a sweep that sounded like pride rather than fatigue. Somewhere beyond the block, a stamp met paper with that square blessing she had learned to hear as music. A patrol car idled at the end of the street and then moved on because nothing here required rescue anymore. Emily brushed her teeth and studied her face in the mirror with the sober wonder of someone catching herself in the act of becoming. She climbed into bed and curled toward the wall where a frame would soon live. "Read," she said, and Sarah read the first paragraph of the morning's front page, in the even tone of a person who trusts a day to hold steady. When she finished, She folded the paper and set it on the sill so it touched the case card. The two proofs, shoulder to shoulder. She hung the jacket by the door and let her palm rest on the seam near the collar. Joined pieces, stronger together. She turned off the lamp, and the room kept its shape in the dark. She lay down beside her daughter and felt the honest weight of quiet settle like a blanket cut to fit. Tomorrow she would walk to the community center and collect a packet with her name spelled right and a badge that would live against her chest. She would sign where signatures belong. She would place hours on a calendar that had spent too long belonging to other people's emergencies. None of this felt like parade. All of it felt like victory, not loud, not forced, executed with the patience of craft, the care of chosen materials, and the knowledge of exactly where the frame will hang. Sunday came like a soft answer that did not need to raise its voice. Light moved across the east window without urgency. A pale ribbon that settled on the small square table and the second-hand rug that forgave every footprint. The bakery below opened its door, and the bell offered one bright syllable, not a summons, only a greeting. In the hallway, a neighbor tried a laugh that would probably last the city exhale, and the apartment matched it. Sarah woke to the kind of quiet that felt earned rather than fragile. The jacket hung by the door where a hand had once rested along the seam, a memory stitched into leather. On the shelf, the folder kept its spine, the case card at its shoulder, and the first drawing where a small triangle lived inside a square, their private tent under a roof. The space on the wall waited for a frame with the calm of a promise that knows it will be kept. She set water to heat and stood by the window while steam braided itself into the air as if it had patient work to do. Emily tumbled out of sleep and crossed the rug with the confident shuffle of a child who has begun to trust the floor. She pressed her cheek to the cool edge of the table to learn the morning by touch. Pancakes, she declared, and the word felt like a small flag planted on safe ground. Pancakes, Sarah agreed, and the room shed another stray thread of fear because certainty had been spoken aloud. They went down the stairs with their hands nested. Butter warmth met them at the bakery door. The owner's nod had changed over the past week, from careful to familiar, an upgrade earned without negotiation. 2 plates found the window table, along with coffee, and a small glass of orange that made the light look thicker. Emily poured syrup the way a careful electrician lays cable. Outside, a patrol car drifted past with the ordinary indifference of a vehicle that belonged to the street and not to anyone's disaster. Above the register, a television ran the morning news without sound. A ribbon of text crept along the bottom long enough to confirm that calendars were doing what calendars do. The owner raised the volume just enough to let an anchor pronounce a case number that now lived in Sarah's folder, then lowered it back to bakery hush. A tray of croissants came out of the oven. Ordinariness filled the room until even memory had to sit back and watch. Jake and Bear arrived like dusk arrives, first at the edges and then fully present, carrying the smell of road that meant they still belonged everywhere. They stood near the counter long enough to become part of the air, then joined the window table without any ceremony that might make friendship heavy. Jake rested his forearms on the wood in a way that told the table it had already proved itself. "Morning," he said, and the word felt like a steadying hand. "Morning," Sarah answered, and the exchange did what it needed to do. Emily slid a wedge of pancake toward the center with the solemn hospitality of a tiny diplomat. "Do you want some?" she asked. Bear grinned like a man grateful for a treaty he did not deserve. "Food tastes better when a kid offers it," he said, and took a bite so small it counted as respect rather than theft. They did not narrate the past. They did not lift the night onto the table. The story belonged to the folder now, and that is where it would stay until it needed to walk. They talked instead about the new shelf, and where a frame might hang without teasing the paint, about a plant that forgives if a day forgets to water, about how certain seams can outlast weather. Jake tapped the jacket lightly with knuckles that understood tools. "That seam holds," he said. "Find a plant with the same attitude." Emily nodded like a foreman signing off on a plan. After breakfast, they walked the short block to the community center for the packet the director had promised. The lobby smelled like clean wood and soap that did not pretend to be anything other than soap. Photos of winter coat drives and after-school recitals lined one wall, evidence of small mercies properly filed. The woman at the desk greeted them by name, slid a manila envelope across the counter, and pointed to a temporary badge that would live on a clip until a photograph took its place. "If the building gets loud and you need quiet," she added, "there is a small room with a kettle that has no opinions." Sarah smiled at the phrasing. The woman wrote "kettle no opinions" on a sticky note and stuck it to the inside of the envelope like a supply. A girl with a paper crown nearly collided with Emily, then stepped back and bowed as if the lobby had decided to double as a court. Emily returned the bow with a seriousness the crown respected. The crown slipped, then righted itself. Their dignity continued down the hallway without injury. Back upstairs, the apartment received the packet the way a shelf receives weight that matches its rating. Sarah set the envelope in place and felt the wood accept it without complaint. She clipped the badge to her shirt and watched it hang there like a small, square truth. Emily practiced clipping and unclipping it on the back of a chair, beginning a ritual she would one day tease her mother for keeping. The neighbor arrived with a plant in a chipped pot. "This one forgives," she said. "It droops to ask and lifts to thank, and it is generous about second chances." Sarah placed it on the sill, and it took up its post as if it had trained for this window. Leaves faced the light with a confidence that did not mock anyone. Later, a message from the assistant district attorney arrived with the clean bones of a timeline. Arraignment midweek. A judge assigned who keeps a calendar like a responsible train. Attendance optionale. If you choose to come, I will sit beside you. If you choose not to, I will call and offer only what you want to hold. Protect your hours. The law can walk without leaning on you every step. Sarah read the lines twice, not because she doubted them, but because the language itself had become a kind of rest. An email from the liaison followed with a small, measured mercy. 2 workers from the tower had added their statements to the file. Their names now lived beside their words under the same case spine. If others reach out, the folder will make room. Sarah printed the note and slid it behind the order. The printer's hum felt like a quiet engine, not a siren. Afternoon folded itself into the room. The lamp drew a circle of warm patience on the table. The plant settled into the light, slow turn. Emily cut a neat window from a scrap of paper and taped it over the drawing so the little triangle of proof could look out. "Now it lives there," she said. Sarah nodded. Certain sentences, she thought, needed to spend time in a room before they took a wall. They ate dinner while the neighborhood learned the color of evening. The small table welcomed elbows that had earned their rest. The badge rested on the shelf beside the case card like 2 neighbors who knew when to keep each other company and when to let the hallway carry the sound. After dishes, they walked to the park. The swings held the air without complaint. The grass forgave new footprints, the way it forgives old ones. A couple arranged a stroller with the careful geometry of care. Jake and Bear followed at a distance that respected both safety and silence, then took a bench like 2 men who had always known how to share a view. Jake glanced at the badge. and made a small, approving nod that did not ask for an explanation. "First day soon," he said. Sarah touched the clip and let herself say yes again. Bear looked toward the apartment window where the plant made a simple case for green. "That one will forgive," he said. "People do too," Jake added. "When a room stops arguing with their existence, no one tried to turn the line into wisdom. It already was, and it did not need a frame." They watched the sky practice its fade. The bakery flipped its sign from open to rest, and the bell rang once, satisfied. A train far away drew a pencil line of sound and let it disappear without flourish. A patrol car passed and did not look for anyone to save. The silence that followed felt like a tool in expert hands. On the walk back, Emily took Jake's glove in one hand and her mother's hand in the other, a human proof that two steady grips can share the same person without tearing her apart. At the door, she returned the glove with museum care. "Thank you for the exhibit," she said, and Jake laughed softly, the kind of laugh that tells a bird it is allowed to leave a branch. Inside, the apartment felt like a design rather than a barricade. Sarah hung the jacket by the door and rested a palm on the seam as if sealing a pact that had already been honored. She set the badge beside the case card and opened the folder one last time, not to check, but to honor. The advocate's first note waited near the front. "Your file is not a rumor." She considered it for the frame and decided the sentence could live in the room a little longer before it took the wall. Emily brushed her teeth while humming the easy melody the community center had played in the lobby, a tune about showing up that moved like a steady heart. She climbed into bed and faced the place where a frame would hang. Sarah turned off the lamp and left one small light near the plant. Because forgiveness is easier in rooms that show their corners, the building offered the honest thump of a door finding its latch. Somewhere a stamp met paper with that square relief she had learned to trust. The city continued its arithmetic and did not ask anyone to solve for fear. Sarah lay down and let the mattress keep its promise. Tomorrow would bring a packet, a tour, a list of keys and rooms and names. A badge would rest against her chest and tell the right story without speaking. The folder would wait on the shelf like a spine she could show or keep covered. The wall would welcome a frame when both were ready. The apartment would hold, she exhaled, and the day stood on its own legs. Sirens belonged to the past. Bells belonged to the present. Stamps belonged to the record. She thought of the simple logic that had carried them here. Not punishment, but building, not spectacle, but proof. Not a shout, but a signature, just as signs in cold ink. In the end, Sarah's story reminds us that silence can be a shield, but it can also be a cage. Real strength begins when we dare to speak, even if our voice trembles. Justice, as this story shows, is not always loud or swift. Sometimes it comes in small, steady acts, filing a report, saving an email, standing our ground when the world expects us to bow. The truth is, gold doesn't fear fire, and neither does dignity. What defines us isn't what happens to us, but how we choose to respond with integrity, courage, and the refusal to let cruelty rewrite who we are. Every injustice, no matter how ordinary, carries a chance for transformation. The people who listen, document, and stand beside us, like the advocates, neighbors, and riders in Sarah's world, remind us that community is a form of justice too. And for those who've endured silence too long, know this: your story is not a rumor. You matter. You always have. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment when speaking up changed everything? Share your experience in the comments. Hit like if Sarah's courage inspired you, and subscribe so you won't miss more stories about resilience, truth, and redemption. May your days ahead be steady and kind, and may every closed door in your life be replaced by one that opens quietly, but stays open just long enough for the light to come through.